So anyone, regardless of where they're born or what class or what social class they were born into, can always attain success if they have a narrative of American dream. Currently in the world, the American dream is already one of the most dominant and most influential narratives in the American society. So like people are encouraged to work hard, and like they're encouraged to pursue education, pursue their beliefs, pursue their dreams. They're encouraged to take opportunities, start businesses, and they believe that they can improve their lives regardless of their backgrounds and achieve their goals. This belief will influence the schools, families, and individuals all around the world. Before I move on to my arguments of a proposition, I want like to characterize what exactly the American dream is. So the American dream is the belief that you like your starting point does not determine where you ultimately end up in life. So that means that hard work, effort, perseverance, and like risk taking can always improve your life in like and your future. So success is something that people can work towards to rather than something fixed by their background that's fixed at their birth. So that means that the American dream does not actually like just
Your
promise success. No. How like it does not tell people that everyone will become rich. It does not guarantee that everyone will like achieve their goals. But what it does is that that it promises that no matter where you start, there's always a reason to like keep trying to work towards your goal. So on proposition, success is defined by like each person's own goals. For one person, success may be like becoming a doctor or something. For another, it could be like having starting a business or becoming rich. Like for other people, it could just simply mean that giving their children a better life than they have had. Like the size of the goal does not matter. All as long as the goal are achieved, it counts as success. So what matters is that the people continue working towards their goal, and this is what we think the American dream exactly supports. Now, like opposition might tell you that there's going to be a lot of structural barriers that exist in this because of their background. Like we agree, some people could be born richer, some people could be born to have better education, some have like more connections. But like if you build a dominant narrative around those barriers, people will just like become pe- the message that people hear will just become like your background matters more than your effort, your class limits what you achieve. Like many of your outcomes are determined before you even begin. So like opposition cannot tell people anymore like if you work hard, you could become whatever you want. Because in their world, it wouldn't be true because the narrative is not like that. But best they could say is that work hard, but your background may still stop you, and work hard, but the system could still hold you back. So that is a world with far less hope. And the burden that on our the proposition is very simple because like even if success never guaranteed, but society would always be better when people believe that improvement is possible than when people are constantly reminded of reasons they might fail. Now, moving on to my arguments. My first argument is that the American dream actually gives people a reason to keep going, and it creates resilience when people face hardships and setbacks. So, like, the premise to this is that, like, life is always difficult for anyone at some point in their life. So like people will fail exams, people could lose jobs, people could face major setbacks in both their workplace, their education, their relationships, etc., etc. But difference in the different narratives is how people will see those failures. Under the American dream narrative, these failures become something that's more temporary because people will think that I haven't succeeded yet. However, I can still come back. I can still improve. I can still try again because they believe that effort still has value and it can improve their life quality. So, like, if opposition pushes the narrative that constantly reminds people of barriers standing in front of them, all they would think is that, oh no, I failed right now. I can't do anything else that could improve my life anymore. So, like, after enough failures, a lot of us people that believe that narrative in opposition is that if a system is already against me, why should I keep trying? And that's exactly what like the American dream exactly does not remove these obstacles, but it doesn't exactly remove these hardships in life. However, it does give people a reason to keep pushing through these obstacles in life. For example, like you have like a very like not well social class, like for example, like an immigrant families who have like very limited money that just arrived in a different country that have that and they face like language barriers and they have very few pe connections in that country. Like, however, because they believe in the American dream narrative, they continue like working in multiple jobs and they invest for their child in a better
Point of
education
information.
because they uh because they believe their sacrifices can create a better future. Rejected. Like you should care about this because like the greatest danger here is like not failure. The greatest danger in the world is like if they actually give up on these hardships they face in life. And the fact is that the American dream keeps people like continuing even after they face a lot of there of a lot of hardships. And quickly moving on to a second argument that my second speaker would expand to is that people are more willing to invest themselves and like put in more effort when they believe that their effort may create a change. So the premise to this is that education, training, and like all of these self-improvement matters and hard work actually do we agree that it requires a lot of sacrifice. So like people can spend a lot of time studying, they could like learn new skills, they could work extra hours, they could like in order to like just start a business, they could like move to new cities to achieve their goals. However, none of these things guarantee success. But people do that because they believe, because of this narrative, that there is a chance that their life will improve. And the American dream is exactly what motivates them. So if it's opposition narrative, it could like weaken that motivation because it repeatedly tells people that factors outside of hard work will control the most things and it'll matter more than whatever they do themselves in life. And eventually, fewer people will are going to be willing to take difficult tasks. So like without this American dream belief, fewer people will invest themselves to actually create change because they think that their life was like decided in the beginning and the structural barriers already exist. So ultimately, if that's society will become less ambitious, less innovative, and less dynamic of hard work. So because of these reasons, we believe the American dream should remain the dominant narrative in the world. Thank you.
This debate is just not about whether or not hard work matters or whether or not success is possible, like our proposition has framed their entire case around, right? It is about whether the American dream should be the dominant narrative through which society is able to understand success and failure, right? We oppose this narrative as a dominant narrative because it obscures the structural inequality and it also unfairly blames the disadvantaged and it also narrows the society's conception of a good life. First of all, has presented us with as the opposition, as a proposition, has presented us with a really unfair and extreme stance. As a leader of opposition, I feel like there's a necessity to fix that, right? Let's reread the motion here. The motion says that this house opposes the American dream as being the dominant narrative in society. The main thing to know here is the dominant narrative, not the American dream, right? We do not oppose people having ambitions or hard work being rewarded or having individual success stories, right? We just oppose a society where the primary narrative used to explain success and failure is that anyone can achieve upward mobility through sacrifice, risk taking, and hard work, right? Instead, society should be able to adopt a much more nuanced approach that recognizes, structural barriers, unequal starting points, multiple definitions of a successful life, and a role of luck, institutions, and collective support. What is a dominant narrative here, right? A dominant narrative is defined as a default story that's taught in schools, right? It's also the main lens used by media and politicians. The government side must prove that society is better off when the American dream is the primary narrative. Secondly, that the benefits generated by this narrative outweighs any harms created by oversimplifying a social reality. Thirdly, that having this dominant society produces better outcomes than alternative and more nuanced narratives, right? And most importantly, the government side just cannot win by saying, oh, some people are motivated by the American dream, right? They must justify it as a dominant narrative. On our side, on the opposition, we do not have to prove that upward mobility never exists or that hard work never matters or that people should be pessimistic, right? We also don't have to prove that the American dream is complete. We just need to show that it should not be the dominant social or societal narrative. We're going to prove that through three main arguments. Let's move on to constructive. The first main argument here is that the American dream will individualize structural failure. When the American dream becomes a dominant narrative, society will stop viewing poverty and disadvantage as collective problems and then start viewing them as personal failures, right? A dominant narrative doesn't just tell people what is possible, it tells them how to interpret the outcomes. The American dream provides a really simple story, right? Which is hard work becomes success. Therefore, when success doesn't occur, the implied explanation means lack of success means lack of hard work, lack of sacrifice, lack of ambition, you're a failure, you're lazy, you're bad, right? The government will that the dream merely encourages effort, right? But our response is that narratives don't only influence the behavior, but they also influence the attribution, right? People need explanations for why some groups consistently do worse for others. The American dream supplies an individual explanation, which is that the person is not working hard and he's lazy, and he or she is lazy, and a failure, right? This matters because structural barriers are often invisible to those who are actually not experiencing them, right? For example, if you have unequal school quality, if you have segregated neighborhoods, if you have family wealth gaps, most likely the rich families, the people living in the better neighborhoods and the people going to the better schools will not experience them, and they will probably not see them, right? The American dream encourages people to focus on the final outcome rather than the conditions that actually produce it, right? And so the result is that we get a society, I'll accept that later, the result is that we get a society that is misdiagnosing every single problem, right? So instead of asking, oh, why are the poor communities remaining poor across generations and how do we fix that? What the people will be asking is, oh, why aren't these people in these communities making better choices? Because obviously they don't get the better choices, right? Because they're being discriminated against, right? The impact or the biggest harm is not just to the poor individuals, but also to the society's ability to solve the problems. If your diagnosis is wrong, then the solutions will all be wrong, right? What will you get? You'll get less support for structural reform, less public sympathy, and less willingness to invest in disadvantaged communities. That is extremely harmful. Yes, accept that POI.
The central idea of the American dream is the possibility that everyone can achieve no matter where they start off, not that everyone has the obligation to challenge stereotypes and achieve success.
Oh, so what you're saying is that we shouldn't challenge stereotypes? I don't know what that was, but we never opposed that the American dream wasn't about that. We're saying that because the American dream is about no matter where you start, you're able to achieve success. If you aren't as successful, then they will just not acknowledge where you started from. Okay, let's continue. Argument 2, the American dream moralizes economic outcomes, right? For example, dream will transform the economic success from a material condition into a moral judgment. Notice that the definition here explicitly in the info side already tells us that success is achieved through sacrifice, risk-taking, hard work, and rather than chance, right? I don't think that's a descriptive statement. I think that carries a strong moral implication. Successful people have succeeded because they have admirable traits, right? And if that is true, then the reverse naturally follows that unsuccessful people lack those admirable traits, right? This is really problematic. The economic outcomes are never solely determined by effort, right? Two equally hardworking people can experience a lot of different outcomes because of, I don't know, inheritance, family support, timing, race, gender, and basically everything, right? However, once the American dream, even following their definition, and we are following their definition, becomes dominant, society increasingly interprets wealth as just evidence of your character, right? This produces two main harmful impacts. Firstly, excessive admiration for the successful. People assume that if you are rich, you must have earned it. Not really, right? Secondly, a stigma against the unsuccessful, right? People assume that if you are poor, you must have made bad choices. Not really, right? So at the end of the day, the vulnerable will suffer a double burden. One, they have already experienced the disadvantage, and secondly, they are blamed personally and individually for that disadvantage, right? Harmful because it's attacking both material welfare and also dignity. Final argument here, it will crowd out the alternative visions of a good life, right? The American dream will narrow society's understanding of what success is and what failure is, and it will pressure people into pursuing one single particular life path, right? Remember that emotion is about a dominant narrative, right? The problem isn't that an American dream exists. The problem is that it becomes a central cultural ideal. When one narrative dominates, then the other values will automatically become secondary, obviously, right? So what does the American dream actually reward? The American dream celebrates upward mobility, entrepreneurship, financial achievement, and basically all of that, right? These becomes the most socially celebrated and respected forms of success, right? So what gets marginalized? If you become a caregiver, if you stay in your own hometown, if you're creating art, if you're preserving culture, right? These choices may provide immense fulfillment for you, and you might feel successful for that, but they are not easily recognized within the logic of the American dream, right? You and the opposition, and the proposition side just can't claim that, oh, people have different standards, because society only has one standard after you have a dominant narrative, which is what this debate is talking about, right? So at the end of the day, the government will say that, oh, the dream will give people ambition. But our response here is simple. A society should not impose a single definition of ambition. For all of these reasons, please give the ballot to the opposition.
The one thing that I want to clarify right now is success doesn't just have one criteria, and it does not have a fixed definition, which is what opposition have claimed during her speech. So the one thing that I want to clarify is American dream is the ideology that anyone, regardless of where they're born or what class they're born to, can attain success. So we're defining it as like the two clarifications to that. One, the ideal success here is not often becoming a famous politician or celebrity, but instead it is symbolized by having like a decent house, steady employment, and ability to retire from your job comfortably. Often the the social like the misconception is that people always think that success is either you becoming really famous celebrity or famous politician. But first of all, for most people, they don't actually seek that in their pursuit to American dream. They just want a steady life, a steady house, and the ability to retire from job comfortably. Their standards aren't that high. And the thing is, not everybody has the same standards. And the purpose of the American dream is to find your pathway and to seek your fate. And it's not to pursue like the only pathway to becoming a famous actor or like celebrity or politician. It is finding your own definition of success instead of being confined to one definition that we believe that the society has caged us into. So, and second of all, definition of fail. What is fail? The opposition seems to think that if you don't become a celebrity or really famous people, you fail. But in reality, there's tons of people. If we follow your standard, then everybody in the world, except for the minority of people who actually become so famous, and only a minority people are considered as successful, and the rest of people, the majority, are being considered as people who fail. But what is the true definition of fail? You can't say somebody has failed if they're being like a plain worker, because they are making sacrifices. They are being sacrificed because they are doing the most fundamental job that society needs. Being a worker, being like a part of the necessary process of like assembly lines. Because as mentioned before, different people have different definitions of fail or success. They might think that they just have a successful life. They have a stable salary. They have a stable family, and they have like a stable mental health as being a worker or being like a plain manager or boss. And they're not being a famous celebrity or something, but still they have achieved success adhering to their own standards and criterias. So the thing that I want to destigmatize is that there isn't only just one criteria or definition for success. Instead, the definition or criteria for success varies for different people, and we shouldn't just confine that one definition of the success and put that burden onto everybody. So the American dream does not say that every rich person is morally superior or that every poor person is lazy. The American dream only says that effort can improve your life and that your future is not completely fixed by your background. It does not make the idea of the American dream does not make assumptions of why you're born in the background and why you ultimately end up in that background. There's a huge difference between saying success is the
Point of information.
no. So there's a huge difference between saying success is possible through hard work and saying anyone who fails deserves their failure. We only defend the first claim, not the second. So, as previously mentioned, the central ideology of the American dream is being able to shape your own destiny and define what success means to you and pursue what you truly want yourself. And my argument is that the American dream promotes a society that focuses on possibility in the majority rather than focusing on limitations. When we aspire for success, success becomes something that people want to achieve. It becomes something that we pursue. But if we focus on the limitations and believe that social and wealth gaps can't be overcome, then society will cultivate a mindset that fears failure. A mindset that is too afraid to seek success just because there's barriers ahead of us. Not everybody achieves absolute success in the end. Like the success that the conventional success that of being like a famous celebrity or politician. But the American dream isn't only something that teaches us to climb our way up. It is also an ideology that teaches us how to deal with setbacks. If the opposition claims that people who fail during the pursuit of the American dream will be heavily discouraged or be considered as completely like a failure or somebody who doesn't try, then their point doesn't stand because even without the American dream, many people still fail when they have big dreams. And second of all, failure is a part of the American dream. The idea of the American dream itself provides the mental resilience for people to bounce back. And even so, many people still even so, giving up is something that many people still do, even without the presence of American dream. It is just many people's choice and occurs as a natural part of the society's phenomenon. So in the ops model, like let's consider the ops model. So when people are likely to give up before they try, this means that like a worker like at the very bottom of a society might fear to challenge the stereotypes and cannot overcome those barriers because they're too afraid to challenge the stereotypes of society and the barriers that they face. Since they're afraid of those social and economic barriers, isn't that type of failure even more pathetic and worse than failure when you try? So thus, the American dream supports the idea of trying despite the challenges posed by society. Trying and failing is better than not trying in the first place. So in the end, we think that the prop and another argument is that we can argue that as American dream, it is really powerful because it exposes hypocrisy within a country or like any systems. So let's say a country claims that we should believe that hard work should lead to success. Then why won't the citizens will ask, or they might ask, why are poor schools underfunded? Why do full-time workers still live in poverty? Why does race or gender still block promotion? Why can rich children buy opportunity while poor children are told to work harder? These problems and hypocrisy can be exposed by the dominance of the American dream and does not and has lower chance of being exposed or being recognized under opposition's model. So this is if we look at this from a large impact, so if these hypocrisies can be revealed, then first of all, we can root the problems in these social systems. We can identify why are these social systems like unequal. We can identify the inequality. And okay, to sum up, we are focusing on the possibility of like everybody being able to succeed. Not that everyone has the obligation to must challenge stereotypes and become like famous people. So the opposition is confusing the definition of success and failure. And for all these reasons, proud to propose. Thank you.
The American dream is a belief that everyone, regardless of where they're born or what class they're born into, can attain success. But that is fundamentally not true. People obtain the same level of success just when everyone's different. Those who are wealthy obviously get more opportunities when they're born, and thus we believe that success should be defined by yourself, not because of an American dream, not because of a benchmark that the wealth set. Judge, in my speech, I'll basically give a few rebuttals to their main contentions, do some rebuilding and impact weighing, and finally provide an extension to further my partner's speech. So their main contention is about motivation, in which people can reach success with the American dream and people can feel like they can succeed. But Judge, what we don't support is the particular part in the American dream as a dominant narrative, not normal optimism or any mindset involved in hard working. Of course, we also want hard work, we also want optimism, but it is not in the way of American dream. The part we don't agree upon is the part that regardless of where they're born or what class they were born into, you can still achieve success as defined in this info slide. It is not motivation that goes nowhere that we want. With this mindset, those who are poor will sacrifice too much and still stay poor, hard work and wasting time at something meaningless. If people think that the poor have the same opportunities as the wealth, sacrifice, risk-taking, and hard work is the key, they'll apply to those who are stressed out and seemingly stuck for whatever reason. That might be environmental, that an individual cannot solve. You must acknowledge that anyone cannot achieve the same amount of success. This motivation is no longer motivation, but manipulation and a risk to mental health. Those who succeed or have more born opportunities can be seen as those who are working. Those who can see those who are working without much product or struggling as lazy or working with no effort. If what you're saying is that effort really leads to success, then doesn't it indicate that not being successful means no effort? Secondly, they spoke about success as something to be worked toward. We shouldn't be defined and those who are poor should not be defined as failing. But Judge, do you think someone with infinite wealth will have the same opportunities as the poor? Obviously not. That is common sense. You might see them born into poor families win the Nobel Prize on the news, but what is the chance of that? 1 in a million. Those in the poorer regions
POI.
naturally don't have enough resources from where they're born. They don't have access to good facilities. Some places maybe even basic resources like electricity, water, let alone good education. What about the wealth? They get comfort, love, and more importantly, born with power, status, naturally coming with the opportunities for them to learn, excel, and succeed in life. What is NPOI?
We are not saying that like the poor will have the same opportunity that the rich. However, we are like saying that like they still can work for what they want because like
Okay,
they
we get
have
the
the
POI.
incentive to motivate.
We get the POI. I will redefine success later on in debate and say how there is actually no natural will. What about the poor, right? Of course, they look for success. Those who have normal mindsets are forward-looking, but they're not as extreme as the American dream. They can success, whether it is to raise themselves out of poverty, get them into the middle class, or give their children education. These are all good mindsets and good forward-looking views that can lead to success as defined by everyone differently with different values. They are yet to define what success really is, and I'll give you an actual logic. Often, success is defined as having status and money. This is because this is, in fact, a dominant mindset or branch under the American dream as of the status quo. And this is actually problematic in a multiple ways. Of course, yet again, wealth have lots of power and can easily be defined as the benchmark. They are born with such things, and it is easy to maintain such status with your future generations. People know that these people are successful and these people have lots of freedom. And often people can think under this narrative, if they can do this, why can't I? Those in lower classes will set those extremely high and unnatural standards into the definition of success, even if everyone's different. The poor see that, but the mindset tells them they can do that too. But is that sense? Rarely. All the poor can do under the mindset is to give up time, money, and wreck themselves more with the more risk taking, like gambling, and hope for something that might not exist. What is the impact then? Many meaningful life choices do not maximize mobility. Becoming caregiver, staying in one's hometown, community organizing, these choices may provide immense fulfillment, but under the American dream, they are not easily recognized. Second, more sacrifice, more risk taking. Judge, risk taking does not guarantee success, and putting so much effort into competing with infinite wealth and power until you burn out is obviously not a good choice making. Now moving on to an extension. Shield for government inaction. We prove to you that success is simply impossible and you actually worsen the wealth poor inequality gap. Right? The fundamentals. The American dream basically says that everyone can attain success. This means that the mindset means that the people believe that regardless of their surroundings, they can always succeed. Even in the poorest, most corrupt, or most unstable places, the government can claim that there are simply not working hard enough. It's not because systematic issues that is obviously the root cause. And it shifts the burden from the state to solving problems of poverty with funding, subsidies or free support, etc., to individual problems, to the citizens. The government can claim that there is no point for action. The areas are like that because people are lazy, they don't have the correct mindset, etc. And other people can also frame them as struggling because they aren't working hard enough, they aren't using the mindset correctly, because the mindset tells that everyone can succeed. Right? People struggling with poverty, unemployment, disorder, poor utilities, or costs can see themselves as actually failures and people who aren't taking enough risk. They only take more and more risk, and obviously that is negative. Failure can be seen as an individual problem, and with governments not solving anything, this means that poverty will maintain there and infrastructure will remain bad, etc. And thus, for everyone to alleviate the problems, please vote for opposition.
First,
Let me start by calling out the biggest problem with the opposition case. They never explain how change actually happens in their world. They spend their entire speech telling people that outcomes are largely determined by wealth, privilege, and social class and circumstances beyond their control. While these barriers certainly does exist, constantly emphasizing them creates a mindset where people increasingly sees their future as something that happens to them rather than something they can influence. The problem is that change requires action. A student studies because they believe education can improve their future. Entrepreneurs start because they believe the risk may pay off. An employee works towards a promotion because they believe effort can lead somewhere. The American dream creates this motivation because it tells people that improvement is possible. Under our position, people are repeatedly reminded of the reason they might fail. After hearing this enough times, many people stop asking how I can improve my situation and start asking what's the point of trying if the outcome is already decided. This is why their world is worse. You cannot create social mobility if people stop pursuing opportunities. Neither can you create success if people stop investing in themselves. The American dream gives people the motivation to take that action that makes improvement possible in the first place. Now, let me talk about some problem with their arguments, with their speech. First, they mischaracterized
Why?
our case. They said we are no. They said we are extreme and that we believe everyone can achieve success. That is not what we said. We explicitly said that American dream does not promise success. It promised that effort matters. The opposition is attacking a version of our case that does not exist. Second, they shift the burden. They claim that we must prove the American dream is better than a nuanced narrative. But she has not defined what that nuanced narrative looks like. She has not shown that it produces better outcomes. She is criticizing without offering a viable alternative. Third, they have ignored our core mechanism. She said that American dream individualizes failure, but we have already shown that effort matters are more resilient than those who believe their fate is fixed. She has addressed this. She has not addressed this mechanism. Fourth, they cannot prove that their alternative is better. She says we should adopt a nuanced approach that acknowledges structural barriers, but she cannot tell people if you work hard, you can succeed. She cannot give people a reason to keep trying. She is defending a world without hope. Now moving on to the argument rebuttals. So first, the leader
Yeah.
of that the American dream moralizes economic outcomes. She argued that the American dream turns wealth into moral judgment and poverty into a personal failure. But we have already defined success as personal fulfillment, not just material wealth. A person who works hard and improves their life has succeeded, even if they're not rich. The opposition is using a narrow definition to make their argument stronger. They cannot prove that people will be judged morally for their economic status because our model does not define success as wealth. Furthermore, the opposition cannot prove that their alternative is better. They offer a world where people are constantly reminded of structural barriers and told that their efforts might not matter. That is not empowering. That is defeating. The opposition cannot prove that this produces better outcomes. The second rebuttal is that the American dream crowds out is about how she said the American dream crowds out alternative visions of a good life. She argued that a dominant narrative will pressure people into one life path, but we have already said that success is defined individually. A person can be a caregiver, an artist, or a community giver, leader, and still be successful under the American dream because success is defined by their own goals, not by wealth. The opposition cannot prove that the American dream narrows life paths because our model explicitly allows for diverse definitions of success. Furthermore, the opposition's alternative is vague. She says we should adopt, but she have not explained that. Now onto the second opposition speaker. So first, they said that not everyone can achieve the same level of success. The opposition says that but this so like because not everyone can achieve the same level of success. They said that the American dream is false. But first, we have never said that everyone will achieve the same level. We said everyone can improve their lives. Success is defined individually. A person who works hard and moves from poverty to a state succeeded, even if they have never become a millionaire. The opposition is just using an allied definition of success to make their argument stronger. They cannot prove that a person who improves their life has failed. Second, the opposition claim that those who are wealthy obviously get more opportunity is true, but it does not mean effort is meaningless. People who believe their effort matters are more likely to try than those who believe their fate is fixed. The opposition cannot prove that a society where people believe their fate is fixed is better than one where they believe effort matters. Third, the opposition ignores the mechanism of resilience. People who believe effort matters sees failure as temporary. They try again. People who believe their fate is fixed give up. And American Dream precisely creates this resilience. No. The opposition also says that American Dream manipulates people and harms their mental health by pressuring them to compete with the wealthy. First, the American Dream does not say you must compete with the wealthy. It says you can improve your life. A person can set down their own goals and work towards them. The opposition is again using a narrow definition. Argument stronger. Second, the alternative is even worse. The opposition constantly reminds people of the barriers they face, and that creates hopelessness, which is far more damaging to mental health than any temporary disappointment from trying and failing. Third, people who believe effort matters are more likely to persist through setbacks. They have better mental health outcomes because they feel a sense of agency. Lastly, the opposition says that the American Dream blames individuals for failure and excuses government from fixing structural problems. First, the American Dream actually exposes hypocrisy. If a country claims to believe that hard work should lead to success, then citizens can ask, why are poor schools underfunded? Why do full-time workers still live in poverty? Why does race or gender still block promotion? Second, the opposition has not explained how their will leads to action. They tell people that barriers are too strong and effort is pointless. That does not create pressure for change. It just creates resignation. Now on to the core clashes and weighing. On the first clash of hope vs resignation, the opposition has said that American Dream individualizes failure. When people don't succeed, they blame themselves and feel like failures. This creates stigma and discouragement. However, what we said is the American Dream gives people a reason to keep trying because people who believe effort matters more are more resilient than those who believe their fates are fixed. We win on because the opposition cannot tell if you work hard, you can succeed. At best, they can say you work hard, but your background may still stop you. That is a message of resignation. On the second clash, we win. The opposition has said that the American Dream ignores structural barriers. It tells people that anyone can succeed through hard work, but this is false because many people face unequal schools and segregated neighborhoods. We said that we acknowledge that barriers exist. We have never said everyone will exceed. We said that effort still matters even when barriers exist. We win on this clash because opposition cannot tell people that effort matters. Sorry. Proud of propose.
Now, hoping for a better future motivates people. We do not reject positivity. We do not oppose the existence of the term American Dream, but rather justifying it as, but oppose our government's term as justifying it as a dominant narrative. The opposition here isn't urging for a world dominated by pessimism. The difference between ordinary optimism, which we do embrace, and the American Dream is that optimism acknowledges there are existing flaws in a capitalist country, such as the class you are born into proportionally affects your chances of success. This is the reality, it's irrefutable, but we still encourage people to work hard, to take risks, and to have hope. In contrast, American Dream chooses to intentionally allude to the affecting factors such as class privileges, right? Clash wants success. They say that success has multiple definitions. So even if this is true, even if we adopt their point here, this argument actually helps the opposition, right? If success genuinely has multiple definitions, then there's for one particular narrative to dominate society. Our side actually embraces diversity. We allow people to define success for themselves. We still win on worst case to best case. Clash to motivation, right? Three responses here. A, this is non-unique. Why is motivation unique to their side and only unique to their side, right? Ordinary optimism teaches people the importance of hard work or willingness to take risks. The only difference lies in intentionally alluding to existence of class privileges. Covering up this bias doesn't exactly help the individuals. Second of all, the American Dream could really be phrased as compromise that creates a rather utopian world filled with innocence and consistent opportunities equal to all, informing individuals the existence of existing threats is better when the suppressed truths of class privileges inevitably surface later. a disillusionment hits harder, right? Third of all, the American dream merely obscures class privilege without tackling the problem at its core. Much like draping a cloth over an issue, yet the underlying reality will inevitably surface once people recognize this unaddressed structural flaw, i.e., and individuals from poor families taught from a young age that background and class doesn't really matter. Sure, but the moment they step into society, the reality surfaces, they get suppressed due to a lack of resources and money. Capitalism exists on both sides. The truth is inevitable. We believe that world where individuals are taught at a young age that such factor exists, but not dominant, is a more realistic and sober world. Class 3, they encouraging individuals, right, under their world, under their premise, where they refuse to acknowledge class privileges, but does not of such. Therefore, they are probably going to shame low-income individuals for their failure due to their lack of resources or as lazy or unwilling to take risks. In contrast, the rich who gain success rather easily will be complimented as hardworking as willing to take risks, right? Second of all, they gave an example earlier on about immigrants. They claim in the example that immigrants, in their world, are willing to travel to another country and to adapt and thrive. We have a clear example that really just flips this, right? In USA, in the past, the term American dream once lured thousands of immigrants to their country, right? So at the end of the day, many became homeless or abused. Only the minority struggled to survive and thrive. So at the end of the day, encouragement isn't enough to outweigh the reality where individuals are under cultural differences and class privileges and often stay trapped in endless cycles of living paycheck to paycheck, right? And last of all, on weighing, right? First on long-term benefits over short-term benefits. One clarification that I would like to make before I step into the weighing: this debate is never about which side can tell or encourage individuals to work hard or to take risks, because both sides can. But which side offers you a world where individuals can achieve success? A world that success is actually sustainable in the long term, right? So at the end of the day, the impacts is the one that wins, not verbal promises that fade imminently when the problems in society surface, right? So first of all, let's look at the short-term impacts that the government brings to you. They give you a utopian world, one that is highly skeptical, one where they claim that under the dominant narrative of the term American dream, people get motivated and they get successful. However, they never prove how this is sustainable in the long term. They never prove how they wipe away existing factors that crumples their perfect world and status by the end of the day. People work hard, but class privileges exist no matter what, and the impacts are carried out no matter what. The impacts are temporarily and short-term, right? On the other hand, the opposition we give you rather realistic and sober world, one that does not urge pessimism. The American dream being a dominant narrative where everyone is clouded within the misleading promise that social class has no significant impact. This in and of itself is highly diabolical and doesn't really help individuals once they step into society, right? Success and development is more sustainable when one moves forward and develops while they are aware of the possible tribulations and blocking factors, right? So overall, Judge, if you really care about long-term success and the well-being of an individual in the long term, please vote for the opposition. Thank you.
Judge, at the end of this debate, it boils down to the four main weighing metrics. Firstly, under probability, secondly, under time frame, thirdly, under magnitude, and finally, under severity. Before I start, I'd first like to clarify their continuous claim that success has multiple definitions. Their claim continuously helps our side. If success genuinely does have multiple definitions, then there is even less of a reason for one single particular dominant narrative to dominate the society, right? Our side is the one that's embracing a diversity. We're the one that's allowing people to define success for themselves, right? Government, meanwhile, is asking society to elevate one single story, which is the American dream, above all others, right? And the more diverse success is, the weaker that their justification for having dominant narrative at all, right? They're taking that their case. Now let's move on to the weighing metrics. Firstly, under probability. Government tells us that the American dream motivates people. However, motivation is neither unique to their side nor guaranteed to their narrative, right? People can still be motivated by families, by passions, by communities, by religions, or countless other goals, right? Countless other goals. By contrast, our harms are actually direct and they're actually inevitable. It's an inevitable consequence of their narrative, right? If society constantly teaches that anyone can succeed through hard work, then when people fail, society will naturally search for individual explanations before the structural ones, right? Similarly, when success is framed as a result of the sacrifice and effort rather than chance, then people will inevitably associate wealth with virtue and poverty rather than personal shortcomings, right? So in other words, their benefits are really speculative, but our harms are built into the narrative itself in its nature. Secondly, on time frame, right? Governments long-term and really uncertain. For motivation to produce success, individuals must first work hard to obtain opportunities, overcome barriers, and eventually achieve upward mobility. Congratulations. That process may take like years or your whole life, right? Our harms actually occur immediately because the moment that this narrative becomes dominant, then society is changing how it interprets poverty, right? People internalize failure as personal inadequacy, right? And discrimination and stereotypes already exist so much. We add more to that, what will our world become, right? So even before anybody succeeds, our harms have already materialized. Plus, we went on time frame. Fairly under magnitude. The government's best case scenario here affects a relatively small group of people. It's those who are able to translate motivation into substantial upward mobility, right? However, when there's dominant narratives will affect everyone. Every single student, worker, parent, voter, every single citizen is influenced by the way that society defines success and by the way that society, right? The people who are most affected are often the least likely to benefit. For example, the poor, the marginalized communities, those who are facing structural barriers, those who are already discriminated against, those who choose not an economic path in life, right? So even if the government side can show that some individuals become more ambitious, we actually show that millions of people or the whole entire community are judged, they're categorized, and they're also understood through a flawed lens, right? The scale of our impact is therefore much bigger, the magnitude is much bigger. This is not merely about who becomes successful, but it is also about how an entire society is able to understand human worth. Finally, under severity, this is where I think the debate becomes really decisive that we win, right? The government's benefit is essentially greater motivation, but even if we grant them that benefit entirely, the worst outcome on our side of the debate is more serious, right? We're talking about a society that is blaming disadvantaged and already discriminating against the marginalized individuals for circumstances that are beyond their control, right? Where they're stigmatizing poverty, they are overlooking social injustice, and they're pressuring people into pursuing this super narrow definition of success, right? I think these harms attack the human dignity itself. A person who lacks motivation will lose an incentive. A person who is taught that their struggles are evidence of personal failure will lose their self-esteem, their self-worth, their social recognition, and often their access to meaningful support. Plus, and the severity of misdiagnosing social problems is also immense, right? Once society believes that inequality is primarily due to the result of individual effort, it becomes far less willing to address the structures causing that inequality. For all these reasons, proud to oppose.
A single narrative doesn't mean a single path. Our claim is that there are multiple definitions to success, but that doesn't support opposition's case. They're still stuck in the idea that the American dream is only one fixed idea or standard, which is not true, because the American dream empowers the public with possibilities and hope, rather than framing success in one standard. The American dream does not promise success. That no matter where it stresses that no matter where you start, there's always a reason to keep trying. Now, the opposition misunderstands success as something that can only be achieved by becoming a celebrity or achieving what the so-called standard of the society provides. Success doesn't only have one criterion. I think we have mutually agreed on that, and they forget and a happy housewife with a lovely family and a loving husband might be just as successful as a well-known politician who is famous across the world, but only to their own standards. Okay, now let me answer the question of why our world works. The op world is that in their world, they generally tell people that hard work doesn't lead to success, but you won't survive if you don't work hard. So that lack of motivation and disconnect hurts the less privileged disproportionately. However, our mechanism to change looks like people are motivated to work hard and believe that they can achieve great things, but they are also not delusional about knowing that they can do that without changing the unfair structure. So when they know for sure that they have worked hard, but nothing happens for them, we demand change. Now, we have one that clashes. So clash one is hope vs resignation. Our world is a world that supports the vast probabilities without the predominance of the American dream. The society is likely shrouded by the fear of failure. Our world supports hope and potential, no matter where you start off. While their side fails to promote hard work and makes success look impossible for the underprivileged. Clash 2, individual success via structural barriers. There are always structural barriers to success, but our attitude towards them should be confrontation and overcoming them instead of fear and being scared. We should not. A society can only thrive with hope and optimism if our initial reaction to barriers is to overcome them, not to avoid them. So in the end, I think that the American dream doesn't force people into into leading them to the only single pathway of success, which is untrue. And the current society has been stigmatizing that idea. It is not based on entirely based on motivation, but instead is the pushing factor that can narrow the gap between the rich and the poor. Because it tells you that even if you're even if you're poor, even if you have a really low social status, even if you're underprivileged, it is always possible to try. It is always possible to become successful, to up to your own standards, even if you don't become success in the end. Imagine if the society has people who are aspiring for success, striving for success, that living up to their own standards, and not just we just following the idea that American dream is only becoming really, really successful and becoming what society expects, societal expectations of becoming famous, that's so-called famous. But instead, it allows these people to actually strive for what they truly want and to discover the true meaning at the pursuit of success on the way. It doesn't guarantee success, but allows the people with even the lowest social status to remain hopeful. We believe that in the end, we should support a world that heavily uses the American dream as the primary ideology. So it is what supports the society's positivity and endeavor in the end. So for all these reasons, proud to propose, and we think we have won the debate. Thank you.